Hi, welcome to this session on infinitives in chapter 15 of our textbook. Um, got to look at our textbook, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier by Rob McIver. Now, you may be watching this video as a member of of the church I attend in the United States, in which I'm teaching a class in the fall of 2020, or you may be watching this video as member of a class in the spring of 2021 or later, as we introduce infinitives, or you may be watching this class as a review time in third semester Greek. Whichever it is, we hope it will be of great benefit to you in learning or reviewing the forms and some usage of the infinitive. As usual, I'm going to share my screen with you, not only so you see my lovely face and perhaps use the whiteboard to my side and behind me, but we're also going to look and primarily look at a PowerPoint presentation that shows us how the infinitive is used. Now I'm going to have to switch screens to that. Here it is. And immediately you should see CRST 371, Chapter 15, Infinitive Mood and Uses. That means that this particular presentation was made for review for Greek 3, which is Christian Studies, CRST 371, the course number at Foreman Christian College and University. But you may be watching it as a 272 Greek 2 student, where we first learn about infinitives. Regardless, the content will be the same if we're learning for the first time or reviewing. Now, as we get into infinitives, we begin, in a sense, a new adventure in verbs in the Greek New Testament, because up until now, we have only learned verbs in the indicative form. The indicative form is the, I should say, mood. Here we have it, is the mood which describes fact or plain statements, or can also be questions. And there is a particular form for Greek verb when it is in what we call the indicative mood. But there are other moods, and one of those is called the infinitive. I suppose some grammarians would say it's not exactly a mood, but we classify it that way. And it is fairly easy to learn. The English version you're familiar with, it's the one that we use in our dictionaries, and it's always combined with the word to. There's no subject usually in an infinitive. It, by definition, really doesn't have a subject. It just describes an action or an existence: to do, to go, to see, to be. Is more of an existing sort of verbal idea. So we are starting, though, a new mood, and in chapter 16 we'll have a third. So we have some exciting new developments here. The chapter 16 will introduce us to the subjunctive mood. But first of all, some important things about the infinitive mood. And that is, as we move away from the indicative, we also move away from the augment. The augment only appears in the indicative mood. So up until now, you, for example, have been able to recognize the aorist tense, usually by an augment at the beginning, a prefix, usually an epsilon, or sometimes it contracts with another vowel at the beginning of a verb if that verb begins with a vowel. But still, the epsilon is the basic augment or augment form. It we to make it simple, we would say it throws the action back into past time. We do not have the augment in the infinitive form or the subjunctive form or any other mood, other than the indicative. So this is not the indicative mood, and we do not have augments. The infinitive does not in itself then indicate time. Doesn't indicate past time, even though it might be an aorist infinitive or a perfect infinitive, as we will learn later. These we would normally think convey past time, but remember, we have said many times, the main idea in Greek, the verbal idea, is the kind of action and not necessarily the time in which the action took place. Was it past, or is it present, or is it future? That can be expressed, but it's not the main idea. So the infinitive does not take any augment. The infinitive is not used quite as many times as the indicative mood or the participle. Participles will be our main subject in the third semester of Greek, and they are critical to understanding the Greek New Testament. You cannot go past them. You must get a grasp of participles. But we'll worry about that later on. Right now, we notice that on our graph, the infinitive is used nearly 2,000 times, or in 2,000 verses in the New Testament. And if we look at this graph, again, we see it's used about 2,000 times, the number of times used, as opposed to the number of verses in which it is used. Notice that the participle is used 8,000 times, and the indicative mood is used nearly twice as much, 16,000 times. So that's another reason we started learning the indicative mood first. It's the mood of action and of normal statements. And some of these other moods we will get to know very, very soon. If you read your textbook, please, and then you turn to chapter 15. And if you're using the 6th edition as I have here, you'll need to turn to page 141. If you're using the 5th edition, some of you have that, it will probably be page 139, if I'm not mistaken. I have to adjust because I'm using the 6th edition. It's the newest one, and also because I do not have a copy of the 5th edition. I sold my last one to a person taking this course at my church. In any case, it's the first page of chapter 15. And you notice that it states that so far all verbs have been in the indicative mood. I won't go over his description of the various moods. I've already introduced you briefly to them. If you turn on to the next page, to section 15.1, the infinitive active. And a good thing to do, actually, is to kind of look through a chapter and see, well, what else is coming? We notice that we'll have a present and an aorist infinitive active. And we notice that we will have some irregular verbs and infinitives. That's no surprise. By now we're used to irregular ones. On the next page, in section 15.1.4, we have the infinitives of middle and passive verbs. Now, we haven't really been introduced to the middle and passive voice, and we won't be for a while, but there are some verbs that only appear in those voices, middle and passive. And therefore, we have to know those forms and those verbs, especially the very common ones that are used often. Most of these will be translated by the active voice. So even though it may look like to be answered, for example, it's not the translation, it is to answer. The same way with any language, things that are rules suddenly get broken, but that's what people are like. We like to break rules. We do it with our grammar too. And then we have a little bit on the meaning of the tense in the infinitive mood, which will be very important to section 15.1.5. We have one verb that is important with infinitives because it needs an infinitive always, and that's introduced in section 15.2, dunamai. And then we have a brief statement on parsing, which we will not talk about today. So let's go back to section 15.1 and the infinitive active. And on our screen, you'll see the forms of the added to the present tense stem, to the weak aorist stem, and to the strong aorist stem. You'll need to keep in mind that the present infinitive ending might be added to an aorist stem in order to form an aorist infinitive. So, for example, if we take luo, I lose, but we're going to make the infinitive to lose. The form is the stem lu and the ending ein, epsilon iota nu, lu ein. That means to lose. You could translate to be loosing, but that is, even though continuous action expresses the main idea, one of the ideas of the present tense generally, it's rather cumbersome. So we usually stick with the simple present when translating infinitives. To loose. The aorist infinitive will be with the weak aorist. First of all, the weak aorist or first aorist, whichever term you use, the first aorist, weak aorist stem, which for luo is loose. Remember, sigma added to the present stem becomes the weak aorist stem, loose. And then comes the ending. And the ending for the aorist infinitive is I. So the aorist infinitive is loose I. And how is it translated? To loose. Really. Remember, we don't have an augment here, so we don't have past time. And we'll look at it in just a moment. This is an important section here in this chapter. Luain is translated to loose. Loose I, the aorist infinitive, is also translated to loose. Now, a strong aorist verb like lambano, we will take the strong aorist stem, not lamban. Remember on page, well, it used to be page 104, And I believe it has changed, yes, in the new edition, the sixth edition, to page 106. So I'm going to have to start getting used to saying, remember page 106. Let me go back to me because I think you're seeing too much of just a PowerPoint presentation. Page 106, if you're in the sixth edition, page 104, if up until now you have been using the fifth edition of our textbook. Regardless, remember the strong aorist verbs. You must remember these very common verbs, lambano, and the strong aorist it's not a first aorist, la bon. And the endings of the strong aorist are actually those of the imperfect, which we will learn later. On, es, en, amen, ete, on. Very simple. So those are added to the strong aorist stem. But you have to know those verbs and their stems. If you remember on page 106 or page 104, if you're using the fifth edition, the aorist of horao, I see. The strong it has a strong aorist. It doesn't have a weak aorist. The strong aorist is adon. So I saw adon, you saw ades, he, she, it saw aden, and so on. Or I had eskon. Echo, I have. Past tense with augment, in the aorist tense, eschon. But remember, we are not in the indicative anymore. Turn back to page 142, and I'll go back to my presentation. We're in the infinitive forms. So the present, the aorist infinitive of lambano is lab-ain. It takes the aorist stem and uses what for us is the present infinitive ending, and we have a strong aorist infinitive. And you translate to receive or to take. But you ask, isn't the aorist past tense? No, not always. Not necessarily, especially when the augment is missing, and we never have an augment with infinitives. We have left the augment behind now, once we left the territory of the indicative mood. But we have some more forms. The present tense of present infinitive of balo, to throw, is then balein. Notice the present stem infinitive with the present infinitive ending, ein. The aorist infinitive of grapho is a weak aorist because grapho is not does not change to a strong aorist. It is formed by adding phi with sigma, which becomes psi, and then we add the aorist infinitive I, and it becomes grapsai, which means to write. You say, yes, but wouldn't the present infinitive be graphein, to write? Yes. And the weak aorist infinitive is grapsai, to write. Yes. Both are correct. Remember, we don't have the augment, so we don't necessarily have past time with the aorist infinitive. That's something we just have to get used to. The aorist tense is not the past tense. It is often the past tense when we translate, but there are many times when it is not. And notice how balo changes in the aorist form. It is a strong aorist, And what happens is one lambda drops off. So you have to watch out. If you have two L's, two lambdas, then you have a present stem balo. If you have only one, then you have an aorist stem balo, and the translation is to throw, just like the present tense. It'll make sense in just a minute. Iddain is the aorist of, a strong aorist of see. It means to see. Isn't the present stem horao or the present verb I see? Yes. And the strong aorist is adon, I saw. Yes, but this is not the indicative mood. This is the infinitive. So drop the augment from the aid, and then you have id. Add the present stem ending to make an aorist, strong aorist infinitive to see. Eh? Not to saw? No. There's no such thing in English as to saw anyway. We always say to see. To see is good. Not to see is bad. You notice already one of the uses of the infinitive also in Greek is as what we call a substantive. Now we need to know that the infinitive is usually found with some particular verbs. And one of them is introduced for you if you look over, and we've already mentioned it in chapter 15, section 2, dunamai. I am able. And dunamai is a very important verb in the New Testament, especially the third person singular, dunatai. If you look down, this verb is parsed, or this verb is conjugated, a little differently. It is a middle form, but with an alpha, dunamai, dunasai, dunatai, dunametha, dunaste, dunantai. But the third person singular is the most, by far the most common, dunatai. That is the indicative mood. That is the present tense. God is able is a common statement in the New Testament, and it is simply theos dunatai. God is able. Or it could be a person who is able, but is often used with God. God is able. But then the question arises, God is able to what? To do what? And that is why dunamai is one of those verbs. And by the way, it is misspelled at the top of this presentation. I just noticed. I'll have to correct that. It's not dunami, but dunamai. It needs an infinitive to finish the sentence. So does thello. I want. What do you want? I want to go. Infinitive form. I want. Thello needs, in other words, an infinitive to finish the sentence. So does de, the third person singular of deo. It is necessary, the third person singular. It is necessary to what? I need an infinitive. It is necessary to go. It is necessary to sit. It is necessary to eat. Infinitive forms go with some these very common verbs that they need infinitives. Now notice on your page also you have comparisons of the present tense and the present infinitive active and the aorist tense indicative active and the aorist infinitive active. Notice luo, present infinitive luain, aorist indicative active elusa, I loosed. But the aorist infinitive is lusai, as we just saw. So translation, luo, I loose. Luain, to loose, present infinitive. Aorist indicative active, elusa, translation, I loosed past tense because the augment makes past time. But aorist infinitive, loci, simply means to loose. And so forth. I've given you a chart. Those of you in the FC college classes, you have a workbook, a personal notebook. And in the back, you have this chart of comparison, particularly of the present tense and aorist tense indicative with their infinitive moods. It's helpful for learning, I think. Now, we have some deponent and irregular verbs, and I'll just mention those in passing. Genomai is one that students often make a mistake on. To become in the present, the only difference between it and the aorist tense is often simply the stem. And students overlook this. They see genomai, they see gamma epsilon nu and don't realize that gamma epsilon nu is the aorist stem of this verb. And gamma iota nu is the present stem. So watch out for that gen at epsilon. And watch out also that you don't have two nus, which means you probably have the verb genao. That's another one we get easily confused. The middle passive infinitive is not, in the aorist is not I, but esthai. So we have gen esthai for the aorist infinitive, and me verbs are irregular. Dunai is the aorist infinitive of didomi, to give. And it's best simply to memorize the forms of the most common me verbs because they simply are irregular and you'll get them down. You all have good minds. Enai is the present infinitive of Amy because Amy does not have an aorist tense. With an aorist, with a passive form or a deponent form, as we've called it before back in chapter 9, apokrinomai looks like it is middle or passive, but remember it's translated actively. So the aorist infinitive apokrithenai will simply mean to answer. The present tense infinitive, to answer. And the aorist tense, because this verb takes the passive form, thenai, but also translated actively, to answer. Now note, again, the infinitive is usually found with thelo, dunamai, and de, deo. Here are some more comparisons that you can look at later. For those of you at the FC College, you have the personal notebook with this table in the back where you can compare the present indicative and infinitives and the aorist indicatives and infinitives for the most common verbs. I want to move on and close this session. The rest, I think you can read. You can study the forms that are given for you in the textbook. I want to briefly talk about the way infinitives are used. First of all, infinitives, certain verbs need the infinitive to complete the thought. And this is the third time I'm saying this, actually, if you haven't noticed. We already seen dunamai. I am able to what? To go, to see. Infinitive verb. Achomai is also one of those verbs that needs an infinitive because it means I begin. I begin. What are you beginning? I begin to read. I begin to hear. I begin to eat. Notice each time archomai needs an infinitive to follow it to complete the thought. So it's one of those verbs, and like here, uh, from then, apo tote, from then means from that time, erxato, because this is archomai with in the aorist tense. So he with sigma becomes xi, and we have an augment. This is an indicative verb. From this time began Jesus. Now we have three verbs that tell us what he began to do. Kerusin, to preach. Kai legein, to say. What did he say? Metanoete is actually an imperative. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. But notice that archomai here in the aorist tense in Mark, erxaton, needs an infinitive. In fact, it has two here to follow to make a sentence. From that time, Jesus began. What did Jesus begin? To preach, to proclaim, kerusin, and to say. Actually, Legain explains what he began to preach. We already said dei, it is necessary, of one of the impersonal use of the verb deo. It is necessary to be born again. You must be born again. Or no, sorry, you must be born from above. Nicodemus misunderstood Jesus, who was not saying you must be born again. He was saying you must be born from above. You must receive the work of God's Spirit. Important thing. Now, yeah, there's another thing that's happening here, and I'll explain to you in just a moment. But these are two verbs that need infinitives. Dunamai is another. It is lawful, existing is another. And thelo, we've already mentioned, is also another. And the second use of the infinitive I want to mention in order to move us along is the subject of the verb in the accusative case with the infinitive. This is a form that is common in the New Testament, and particularly with Dr. Luke. In Luke and Acts, he loves to use the accusative, a noun in the accusative case with the infinitive, and the noun in the accusative case is the subject. Now that goes against us. It grates against us. Yeah. The nominative case is the case of the subject, right? There's always exceptions in every language. And this is so common that we need to remember it. When we have an infinitive, sometimes that infinitive will join a noun in the accusative case, and then that noun is actually then becomes the subject. As here, it is necessary, and then we will need to put in parentheses that he go down up Elthain to Jerusalem and to suffer Pathain many things. Up Elthain and Pathain are both aorist infinitives. Notice the aorist form, and Pathain is an aorist, to suffer. But notice that auton is in the accusative case, but it's still the subject. And the reason it's the subject, it won't always be so visible, but it's the subject because dei really makes it a subject. It is necessary. What is necessary? The object. It is necessary for Jesus to go down to Jerusalem. It is necessary. But in Greek, the grammatical form that follows has the noun that is the subject in the accusative case, auton, he. It is not him. It's not being done to him. He is going. And notice the accusative of subject with the infinitive form. Now here's a verse that has caused a difference of opinion among interpreters and translators for 2,000 years, and I don't think it will be solved here either. But Paul says, even as it is right or righteous, dik ion, to me, emoi, it is actually the stressed form, to me, to think this, to think, tuto, this, phronein, to think, huper ponton, concerning all of you, humon, dia to means because, okay? Now we have echen me inte cardia humas, which looks like to have me in the heart you. Because to have me in the heart you. What's going on here is we have accusative of subject with the infinitive. In other words, we look for a noun in the accusative case that then becomes the subject with the infinitive, and we translate it as though it were in the indicative. So it would be because I have you in the heart. That's one possibility. Because I, me, accusative. Because I have you in the heart. Humas, you, accusative. That's one possibility, but the other is also the other way around. Humas is also accusative. So it could be because you have me in the heart, and then the me would be emphasized because it's put forward in the sentence. Both are possible because I have you in the heart because you have me in the heart. Are you confused? Well, look at it some more. And those of you at FC College, ask Mr. Masood to explain this one to you because it's not easy to grasp the accusative of subject with the infinitive, but this is one way it is used in Greek and it is not used this way in English. And we just have to get used to it, especially with Dr. Luke. He loves this form. The rest of these are not so hard to remember. The infinitive of purpose or result. By the way, what's the difference between purpose and result? Purpose is when somebody intends to do something. Result is when it just happens, maybe without intention. So, well, we'll see here in a verse. So that the crowd, Thalmasai, is amazed. That's an aorist infinitive. And by the way, accusative of subject. Ton ochlan is accusative case, but it's the subject. The crowd is amazed. But notice hoste. Hoste means so that, or with the purpose. Could be purpose or result. But Jesus probably didn't do miracles in order to amaze the crowd. He never did that. So this is result. A result of the miracle that was done was that the crowd was amazed. With the result that the crowd was amazed. The articular infinitive. Infinitives can have an article. Or another way to say this is infinitives can be used as a noun. So as here we have using the verb ex anatello, to spring up, sorry, straightway, uh, it sprang up. This is talking about the seed that was sown in the parable of the sower. Straightway, eutheos, straightway, sprang up, diato, straightway it sprang up, diato, because. Don't translate through what, diato. Diato means not through what, it means because. Because not to have much or great ground, depth, uh, depth of ground, sorry. Bathos geese, depth of ground. It didn't have deep ground. Geese is in the genitive case, depth of ground. Because it did not have great, because to have, because to have, because to have depth of ground, or not to have depth of ground, is a little stilted translation, but you get the idea. We have to kind of paraphrase in English, because it did not have depth of ground, or it did not have enough depth to grow. The ground, the stones had just gone a little bit down, a little bit of dirt on top. Dr. McIver mentions the infinitive is used in impersonal expressions in his intermediate book. Actually, this is the same use again of day, of deo. It is necessary for him to go down to Jerusalem and suffer many things. So I'm not sure why he calls this impersonal expressions, but since he mentions it as one of the uses of the infinitive, I'm mentioning it too. Now I'm come back and see you again as we come to the end of this session. I know that this is not easy to grasp a new grammatical form, one so as important as the infinitive, and especially the way the infinitive can be used in the Greek New Testament. But you will get it quickly, and once you have it, it will stick with you. Really, many uses of the infinitive are the same as we do in English. Certainly, purpose or result. I want to go. I want to go. To go is my purpose. Or I want to teach. Why are you going to school, university? Because I want to teach. That is expressing purpose. It's also kind of being used as a noun. What do you want? What's this object I want to teach? So the only other thing that you need to do is to look out for those verbs that are usually followed by an infinitive listed on page, in the 6th edition, 146. In the 5th edition, I think it's probably page 144. And memorize those 4 verbs in the vocabulary. And then notice the infinitives of selected verbs, irregular ones like sein, to live. That's an easy one. You think that to miss, you think that it is a noun when actually it is the infinitive of zao, sein, to live. And then a list of other words that we need to learn to add to our vocabulary on the next page. You do the exercises, but one other thing I need to mention that I said I would at the beginning, and I haven't yet, is the fact that the present tense infinitive and the aorist tense infinitive seem to be translated the same. Yes, but with one caveat, with one big difference. And he explains this in the textbook, Dr. McIver. If someone says in Greek, legein, fellow legein, I want to speak. If some student, for example, said this, I want to speak, a teacher probably would not let him. Because remember, the present tense generally has the idea of progression, of continuous action, not a simple present. More correctly would probably be to translate, I want to be speaking. And the teacher doesn't know how long he wants to talk, so he says, no, you can't speak. But if the student were to stand up and to say, and let's see, all of a sudden my mind has gone blank and I've forgotten the form. So let me look here. Fellow apane, of course. I forgot the aorist, second aorist. See, I'm losing my memory of strong aorist verbs. Apane. Lego has a strong aorist form, apon. And the aorist infinitive is apane. Fellow apane, if I use the aorist infinitive, if the student used the aorist infinitive, he probably only wants to say one thing or to ask a question. It is more of a point action in that case rather than continuous. So the teacher will probably let the student speak if he says thelo apane. He probably would be more cautious if the student says thelo legein, because the verbal idea of the Greek present tense, continuous action, the tendency, I would say, because there are many exceptions, leans towards a progressive present translation. But a one time, can we say in this case, that's not always true, but one time in the aorist tense. So present tense, continuous action, aorist tense, usually not. So to speak and to speak, there's no difference in the English translation of the present infinitive and the aorist infinitive, but there is a difference in meaning, as we will notice, especially in the next chapter when we look at the subjunctive.